Welcome back to Pen on Video. My name is Izzy and I'm here with Craig Snyder, nationally known political consultant and strategist and guest professor at the Annenberg School and recent novelist, to hear about an expert perspective on the debate on Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
My first question is, a lot of news coverage is painting Harris as the winner of this debate. Do you see that there are more nuances to the debate that are being overlooked by this media framing?
I do. I think it's more complicated than that. I think they were tied going in, and I think they were tied coming out, frankly. She did much better in terms of performance, but his strange sort of exotic performance is baked in. It's what people expect after 8 years. I think they were speaking to two different audiences, really, two different halves of America, and that they each sort of achieved what they wanted to and needed to for their part of the country. It remains to be seen what's going to happen when we put it all together on November the 5th.
Amazing. And what do you think were the most important issues discussed, and how did each candidate approach these?
Well, really, there were a lot of things that were important. I do think the moderators did a good job of asking hard questions. Going back to Trump on the question of did you win the election in 2020 I think is necessary, and it reinforced his conviction that he did win and that it was all a fraud, and I think it's important for the country to hear that. At the same time, they pursued with Vice President Harris the changes in policy that she's had since her last campaign for president in 2019. I don't think we necessarily got a really strong explanation of a lot of those things, but it was good that those questions were asked. On the other hand, there were a lot of things that are important that weren't asked. There was no discussion of education, really. There was no discussion of crime, even though polling says it's like the number 3 issue in the country. And the issues that received the most time, the economy and immigration, which sort of everyone agrees are very important in this race, they got the most time, but they didn't get a great deal of depth.
Right.
We got the odd moments of Trump talking about this fictional idea that immigrants in Ohio are killing dogs and cats, right? That probably the most memorable, unfortunately, moment of the debate.
Right.
So we got sort of this. We got this kind of overview of those big issues, but not really the kind of depth that I think would help the few percent of undecided voters who are left to make up their mind.
Definitely. And in that lack of depth, I know personally, when I was watching, I felt frustrated that I felt like the answers weren't answering the questions. Do you think that is inherent to the presidential debate form, or do you think it's unique to these two candidates?
I think it's always been the case that candidates approach these sorts of things as in terms of, I'm not going to answer the question you asked me necessarily, I'm going to answer the question that I want to be talking about.
Right.
And so I'll pick one word in your question that relates to what I wanted to say, and I'll just go off on that. I think that's historically always been the case. But what different moderators have done over the years differently is how much follow-up, how much pursuit. There really was not much follow-up here. There was a little bit of fact-checking, but there was not a lot of real follow-up. So the very first question, right out of the gate, the vice president was asked, are people better off than they were 4 years ago? And she did not answer that question at all. She went off onto her prepared opening statement, essentially. Nobody came back and said, yes, but are the American people better off than they were 4 years ago? She was also asked, you claim you want to secure the border, you support this strong border bill, but it was 3.5 years into your administration before you took any steps along with President Biden to actually do something about border security. Why is that? And again, she was asked the question, she didn't answer the question, she gave a kind of a pivot answer. Nobody followed up. So I think there's a lot of that is on the moderators. I would like to see, maybe this is sort of just, fiction, but I'd like to see a debate in which the moderator asks a question, doesn't get an answer, and says, I'm just going to sit here until you answer my question. You're not going to get another question until you answer this one, right? And see what would happen, how candidates would respond.
People are saying, too, that David Muir and Lindsay Davis were pushing Trump more to make sure that he answered the questions as well. I feel like there were more instances where they said, Mr. President, can you answer the question, yes or no? Like there were more yes or no questions that they pushed him on more. Did you see their role, you sort of touched on this, but their roles as moderators as ineffective? Or I don't know if that's an easy question to answer, like a yes or no, but what did you see in the fact checking?
I wouldn't call them ineffective. I think their primary role is to ask hard questions that cover a wide variety of issues, and they did that. So it's certainly a passing grade, right? But was it an A+? No, because first of all, I do think there was an imbalance in terms of the fact checking and the follow up, and also because neither candidate totally followed the rules on time.
Right.
Right, and that means there are issues like education, crime, et cetera, that you just never get on the table at all.
Is there a moment that you can point to during the debate that you think defined the night?
Oh yeah, immigrants eating cats and dogs. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think that's it. When future Annenberg students are in this class, in 20 years or whatever, that's a clip they're going to watch,
right? Because
it's so, it's so kind of outrageous, and yet very indicative of kind of where our politics are right now. The degree to which internet, misinformation becomes, worthy of serious discussion and serious conversation at the very highest level, which is a presidential debate.
Right. Given your involvement with Haley voters for Harris, how do you think that? What do you think Haley supporters took away from Harris's performance?
I think it was helpful in winning over the Haley voters because she continued to do things that she started at the convention, in terms of talking about herself as somebody who wants to govern for everybody, talking about more moderate aspects, more centrist aspects of her record and President Biden's record. And touting, this broad spectrum of endorsements that she has. It is truly amazing that we have a presidential candidate that is endorsed both by Dick Cheney and Bernie Sanders. Like that's kind of crazy.
Right.
And it shows how extreme Trump is, that he's driven this large portion of the Republican Party that used to be considered the arch conservatives,
right,
to support Harris.
And though Harris won this debate, you touched on this earlier a bit, people are criticizing her for not actually answering the important questions for so many undecided voters on her plans for the economy, her plans for immigration, and more specifically, why her policies have flip-flopped so much since 2019. How do you think that the Harris team will approach this criticism in the coming weeks, and sort of, do you think that they'll address it and that they'll put forth plans and policies, or what do you think?
Honestly, the answer to that question is in what happens in the swing state polls. They're in it to win it. And they're not making these decisions, sort of philosophically or theoretically. They're making these decisions based on what they consider to be the best available evidence of what is working and what's not working. So if they find over the next couple of weeks that the polls in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, those states, they're only states that matter, unfortunately, in our system right now. If they find that those polls are either still favoring Trump or are too close to call, then they're going to have to try some new things. And one of those, I think, an important way to try would be to answer this question, which I know really does nag the swing voters, and that is, why have you gone in such a different direction than you were in 2019? Just tell us why, right? Tell us what happened. It's not that we like where you've gone, but we want to know why. So I think that, but I guess what I'm saying is they're only going to do that if they're compelled to do it. If the sort of higher level themes of optimism and joy and future versus past, if those things are winning, they're going to stick with them.
And how does she, if they do have to make a decision, if they're saying, okay, she's going to have to address why these policies have shifted, what do you think would be like a good answer to that? Like, I feel like she's avoiding it because she doesn't have any way. She's trying to toe this line.
I really actually think it's not as hard as it seems. President Obama got reelected in 2012 saying marriage is the union of one man and one woman. And a couple years later, he was in favor of marriage equality, right? And nobody goes around saying, Barack Obama is a person who doesn't know his own mind or flip-flops on things, right? He said, I evolved. I thought about it more, I learned about it more, I talked to more people, and I changed my mind. And the American people didn't judge him poorly for changing his mind. They said, right on, we're with you, right? So I think she can do the exact same thing. I think she can say, I changed my mind, and here are some of the reasons why.
Right.
I got more evidence, I got more information, number one. Number two, I served as vice president to a moderate president, to a centrist president. And I saw the effectiveness of his ability to get things done in Congress. That if I tried to govern from the far left, I would fail because Congress would never vote for those things. So I think there are ways to do it. It takes a certain amount of courage, but I think there are ways to do it.
And I think that's a very respectable thing for her to do. Like, the world was so different in 2019, which is, I think, why people are so confused, why she can't just say, like, I've learned so much, I've been the vice president, I've seen how things work, that this is my new way to move forward.
Right.
So why don't you think that she's doing that?
Fear of alienating the progressive wing of the party, the progressive wing of the party, including, as I said, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, they are supporting her right now wholeheartedly. And they did not support Biden wholeheartedly. So she doesn't want to, she has this coalition, right? And as I said, it's a very broad coalition. She's trying to be not everything to everybody, but she's trying to be a lot to everybody. And she's afraid, her team is afraid, that, yeah, we might pick up 3% over here on the right, but we might lose 5% on the left.
Right.
Not that those people would ever vote for Trump, but they might stay home if they felt that, I mean, as, for example, we know already that there is a certain element of the party that will not support her because of her position on Israel. Right? So if you now amplify that with other issues, maybe you lose more people. So it's this balancing act that I think she's trying to walk.
And on the other side of the coin, we just heard that Trump said he will not do any more debates. Who knows if that will stick or not, but how do you think Trump's campaign will respond to his loss?
So, first of all, they will deny that there was a loss. And frankly, all presidential campaigns do that. No presidential campaign has ever admitted that they lost a debate. Even, Joe Biden, right, 2 months ago. So, they'll never admit that they lost, number one. Number two, what they're going to say, and by the way, there's some historical truth in this, is the candidate that asks for additional debates is the one who believes that that candidate lost the first one. And historically, there's a lot of truth to that. In other words, so if you believe that you won, that you accomplished what you needed to do, because winning can mean different things, right? But if you believe you accomplished what you need to do, why wouldn't you rest on your lead, right? Why would you risk it? Maybe the next time I'll have a bad night. Maybe I'll have COVID when I walk out on the stage, right? So that's the argument that the Trump people are going to make. We won, and we're going to hold our lead. Now, half the country won't believe it, but the other half will.
Yeah. And in debate history, we know that there have been no major impacts on election results following a debate. Do you think that Tuesday might shift this pattern, or how do you see it actually impacting the results of the election in November, if any?
I don't believe it will have had a significant impact. It could have.
Mm-hmm.
It could have. If Harris had performed poorly, I think it could have been, lights out. But she did great. But she did great, but I don't think great enough. In other words, there wasn't a knockout punch, right? So I do think they were tied going in, and I think they're tied today. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I think they're going to be virtually tied on election day. It's just a question of which way it breaks.
Right. And do you think, we spoke about this briefly before, but do you think Taylor Swift's endorsement will have any effect or impact on the way that people at least are viewing the election?
I think it might, because we're talking about such small numbers mattering here. Mm-hmm. What most people don't know is that Joe Biden became president of the United States in November of 2020 by winning 25,000 votes distributed in 3 states. In other words, if 25,000 people had switched their votes across 3 states, Trump would have won the Electoral College, even though Biden won the popular vote by 7 million. Right? So out of, I forget the exact number, but something like 165 million people voted in 2020. And it's enormous. It's like every person in France plus every person in Germany plus every person in England, right? It's a huge number of people. And it came down to less than like a stadium full of people. Okay, so when it's that close, anything could be the deciding factor, including possibly Taylor causing there to be greater turnout among certain young voters who are her fans. So it could be. Nobody will ever know. But it could be, and you'd certainly rather have the endorsement than not.
Definitely. And lastly, just final statements. How do you expect undecided voters to have viewed the performances on Tuesday?
Well, first of all, it's hard. I think it's hard to generalize because I think people are undecided for different reasons. Right. There are some people who are undecided because the voters that I'm targeting in the work that I'm doing are undecided because they know that they don't want to vote for Donald Trump. They believe that he's taken the Republican Party in a terrible direction, and they don't like that. Mm-hmm. But many of them have never voted for a Democrat before in their lives, and it sort of bothers them to kind of put on the jersey of the rival team, right? So for those voters, I think that the vice president's performance was helpful, not decisive, but helpful. And if she continues those themes of unity and positivity and reaching out and really saying, I'm going to govern from the center, she has a chance to get them. But there are other voters who are undecided for other reasons, because it's a really big, complicated country. And it's hard to know what will ultimately cause them to make a decision. There are a couple of percent, not more, but a couple of percent of voters who deliberately say, I won't decide until the very end, because they want to have heard everything. Right? And there's nothing we can do about that. Like, we can't rush the clock so that they get to that point where they feel comfortable making a decision.
And you have a recent book out. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Sure. So it's a novel. It's a political thriller called Guile, available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, etc. It's kind of a hobby for me, a labor of love that I worked on, mostly written during the pandemic when we were all locked in. And it takes a while to go through the publishing process, so we're just getting it out now. But the book is about a fictional presidential campaign, but you'll recognize characters that are familiar from the real world, because I think that sometimes in fiction you can help explain things even better than in nonfiction. Wow, well, congratulations. Very timely that it worked out to be coming out right now. I feel like politics are on everyone's mind. Exactly. That's so exciting. Thank you so much. That is all that we have. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yay.